He just wanted a quiet morning and a hot cup of coffee. At 92, Frank Wallace wasn't looking for trouble. Trouble found him. 5 bikers, loud and arrogant, saw an old man. What they didn't see was a soldier who had survived war, loss, and fear far greater than theirs. When they pushed him too far, Frank made a call. And in that moment, everything changed. What came next would leave the town talking for years. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement outside Martha's place, the scent of fresh pastries floating through the air. Frank Wallace, wearing his old bomber jacket and veteran's cap, parked his dusty pickup truck and stepped down slowly. His knees ached, but he stood tall. He was halfway to the front door when the rumble of motorcycles shattered the calm. 5 riders rolled in, engines growling like wild animals. They parked in a crooked line, blocking the entrance. Frank didn't flinch. He'd heard worse under artillery fire. As he reached for the doorknob, one of them stepped in front of him. "Look at this old fossil," Zach Reaper Connors sneered. "Shouldn't you be in a nursing home?" Frank met his gaze, eyes steady. "Shouldn't you be in school learning some manners?" The bikers laughed, closing in. One snatched Frank's phone from his hand and held it high like a trophy. "What you gonna do, Grandpa? Call bingo night?" Frank didn't blink. "I was going to call someone who actually respects service and sacrifice." They laughed harder, until Frank's expression didn't change. He just stood there, calm, confident. And then he made the call. If this moment already stirred something in you, imagine what's coming next. Hit subscribe and tap the bell, because these are the stories no one tells, but everyone needs to hear. Be part of something bigger. Don't miss the next chapter. It's not just content, it's memory, legacy, and truth. Franklin D. Wallace was born in 1932 in a quiet town tucked between rolling hills and endless farmland. His childhood was marked by the Great Depression, where he learned that dignity wasn't about what you had, but how you carried yourself when you had nothing. At 17, he lied about his age to enlist. By 18, he was crawling through the rubble of post-war Europe and later through the frozen terrain of Korea. Frank had seen things that still echoed in his sleep. Friends dying in foxholes, faces screaming and then fading. But he never spoke of those things. Not to his wife, who passed away 10 years ago. Not to his grandson, Ethan, who always looked up to him like a hero. Frank's stories were quiet ones, about resilience, brotherhood, and the simple joy of coming home. Now, at 92, he lived alone in the same modest house he'd built with his own hands. Every morning, he followed the same ritual: drive to Martha's place, read the paper, sip black coffee, and chat with Martha like they had for decades. It was his time, his piece of normalcy in a world that had changed too fast around him. To the town, Frank was just the quiet old man with sharp eyes and a stiff walk. But to those who listened carefully, there was something beneath the silence, a steady rhythm of a man who had stood in the face of death and returned with grace. Ethan, now a police officer, often visited his grandfather after shifts, seeking advice more than conversation. Frank rarely offered direct answers. Instead, he handed Ethan little pieces of memory wrapped in phrases like, "Respect isn't asked, it's earned," or "You don't need to be loud to be strong." He was a man forgotten by the noise of the modern world, but never diminished by it. Frank didn't ask for recognition, he only asked for peace. But on that day outside Martha's place, peace was not what he got. Frank never dreamed of fame or riches. What he wanted, more than anything, was to grow old with dignity. After everything he had endured, that didn't feel like too much to ask. A quiet life, a warm drink, a good conversation, that was his definition of happiness. He found comfort in routine. Every morning, the same drive into town, the same corner booth at Martha's place, the same "Good morning, Mr. Wallace," from the waitress who always remembered how he liked his eggs. It wasn't grand, but it was his. That little coffee shop had become his anchor. A place where people knew his name, where he could smile at babies in strollers and share knowing glances with other regulars. Every once in a while, a younger man would ask about his cap and the medals pinned to it. Frank would nod, offer a short answer, and steer the conversation back to baseball or the weather. He didn't want glory. He wanted respect, not for the battles won, but for surviving them. The highlight of his week was when Ethan stopped by on his lunch break. They'd sit together in silence sometimes, other times laugh over stories Ethan brought from the station. Frank saw in his grandson a reflection of the courage and heart he once carried into battle. But beneath it all, there was something deeper. Frank wanted to be seen, not just as a relic of another era, but as a man still standing, still worth listening to. So when he put on that bomber jacket and cap each day, it wasn't just out of habit. It was a reminder to himself and to the world that he had lived through storms, that he had earned his peace. He never imagined that something as simple as walking into his favorite cafe would challenge everything he thought he had left. That 5 strangers with loud bikes and louder egos could try to strip him of the one thing he had fought his whole life to keep, his dignity. And on that morning, as he stepped onto the sidewalk outside Martha's place, he was about to learn just how fragile peace could be, and how quickly it could be taken. The moment Zach Connors knocked the phone from Frank's hand, the atmosphere shifted. The screen cracked as it skidded across the concrete, spinning to a stop beneath the bench outside the cafe. The bikers howled with laughter, but Frank didn't bend to retrieve it. He straightened his cap. Zach stepped closer, grinning wide. "What's the matter, old man? Forgot how to fight back?" Frank said nothing. His silence only fed their mockery. Derek "Tank" Malone cracked his knuckles and stepped forward. "Bet he peed himself," he barked, drawing more laughs. Frank's hands clenched at his sides, but he didn't raise them. He didn't need to. The discipline instilled in war told him this wasn't the time. Not yet. Inside the cafe, Martha gripped the counter, eyes wide with fear. She knew Frank. She knew what he'd been through. She also knew that he'd never call attention to himself unless something was deeply wrong. "Leave him alone!" she called through the glass, but they ignored her. Zach jabbed a finger at Frank's chest. "Tell me, hero, you ever actually shoot someone, or are those medals just for decoration?" Frank took a deep breath. He wanted to walk past them, just get his coffee and forget this moment. But when he tried to step around, Tank blocked him. "You're not going anywhere," Tank growled. "Not until you show us some respect." The irony made Frank's heart sink. Respect. That word echoed in his mind. They didn't want it. They wanted submission. And in that moment, Frank felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Not fear, not exactly, but something close. A deep, cold frustration. The kind that settles in your bones when you realize the world no longer sees you. He looked at the cafe door. At Martha, at the people watching from behind phones and windows, and for the first time in years, Frank Wallace felt small, not because of his body, but because of the way they laughed at everything he had built his life on. They didn't see a veteran. They saw a frail old man, and in their eyes, he didn't matter. That evening, Frank sat alone in his kitchen, the cracked phone lying beside a cold cup of untouched coffee. The overhead light buzzed faintly, casting long shadows on the floor. He hadn't spoken since he returned home. Not to Ethan, not to Martha, not even to himself. The silence wrapped around him like a wet blanket. He'd faced bullets, bombs, and bitter winters in Korea, but nothing had pierced him quite like the laughter of those men. It wasn't the physical intimidation that stung. It was the mockery of everything he had given his life for. For decades, Frank had lived with ghosts. Comrades lost in foreign soil, memories buried deep in silence. But those ghosts had always respected him. Those men, no matter how broken by war, understood loyalty, honor, brotherhood. Today, 5 strangers had reduced it all to a joke. He picked up the phone, running his fingers over the cracks. The device still worked somehow. It rang once. Ethan. Frank declined the call. He didn't want pity. In the darkness, he reached for a drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were letters, photographs, and a coin, old, heavy, engraved with a single phrase, "No one left behind." It had been a gift from his closest friend, Ray Rodriguez, after they pulled each other out of a frozen foxhole in 1951. Ray had saved his life, and Frank had saved his. That coin had stayed with him ever since, tucked away, a reminder of the promise they made. But what did that promise mean now? He looked at the photo beneath the coin. His platoon, all young, all smiling, all long gone. He was the last one, the only one left to remember. Frank placed the coin on the table and stared at it. He tried to swallow the rising lump in his throat, but it stayed. He had always believed that strength wasn't about fists. It was about endurance, dignity, holding your head high even when everything inside you wanted to collapse. But tonight, even that felt far away. His hands trembled, not from age, but from anger, from sadness, from the crushing weight of invisibility. He couldn't stop hearing the words, "What are you going to do, Grandpa?" And for the first time in a long, long time, he didn't have an answer. He pushed the coffee away. His appetite was gone. His pride was bruised. And for a moment, just a fleeting moment, Frank Wallace wondered if the world had truly left men like him behind. If any part of this story reminds you of someone you love or someone the world forgot, take a moment, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes, remembering out loud is the most powerful way to honor those who still carry unseen battles. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds, landing directly on the coin still sitting on the kitchen table. Frank hadn't moved it. He hadn't slept either, just sat there all night as the pain simmered quietly beneath the surface. But as the light grew stronger, something shifted. He reached for the coin again, turning it over in his palm. The weight felt different now, not just metal but memory and meaning. The words engraved on it, "No one left behind," echoed in his mind louder than ever. He remembered Ray dragging him through the mud with shrapnel in his leg. He remembered the freezing wind, the gunfire, the silence that followed, and most of all, he remembered the look in Ray's eyes when they made that pact. "We stand for each other, always." Frank stood slowly, his joints stiff but determined. He walked to the bathroom, splashed water on his face, and looked at himself in the mirror. The man staring back wasn't broken. He was tired, yes, but beneath the wrinkles the fire was still there. He put on his bomber jacket, adjusted his cap, and for the first time in 2 days, he smiled. Not because the pain was gone, but because he remembered who he was. Not a relic, not a victim, a soldier. He picked up his phone, still cracked, and tapped a single contact. Ray Rodriguez. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Well, I'll be damned," Ray said. "Frank Wallace calling before noon. This must be serious." Frank's voice was calm, but resolute. "Ray, I need that favor." A pause, then a chuckle. "You finally calling in that debt, huh?" "I am." Another silence, but this one was filled with understanding. No questions, no hesitation. "Tell me where, brother." Frank gave the name. "Martha's place." Ray's voice hardened. "We'll be there." As he ended the call, Frank slipped the coin into his pocket. The world might have changed, but honor hadn't. And some promises, no matter how old, never expire. The town square was quiet as Frank pulled up to Martha's place the next morning. The old pickup groaned as he turned off the ignition, but Frank's hands were steady. His heart beat with a strange calm. He stepped out, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the cafe. His cap sat firm on his head, and the morning sun caught the edges of the silver star pin on its brim. Inside, a few regulars turned their heads. Some whispered. Word had spread fast. Everyone knew what had happened 2 days ago. Everyone expected Frank to stay away. But there he was, walking through the door as if nothing had happened. Martha looked up from behind the counter, relief flooding her face. "Frank," she said softly. He nodded once. "Morning, Martha." No dramatics, no speeches, just a man reclaiming his space. He took his usual seat, the one by the window, the one he'd earned with decades of presence. The bell above the door jingled again. The sound of boots followed. Frank didn't need to look. He knew. The bikers were back. Zach's voice cut through the silence. "Well, look who crawled back." Frank sipped his coffee, then set the cup down with precision. "Didn't crawl. Walked." Tank laughed, loud and mocking. "You got guts, I'll give you that." Frank turned slowly, meeting each of their eyes. "No. What I have is memory." Zach stepped forward. "You forget how the last encounter went?" Frank didn't blink. "No. I remember everything. Every face. Every word." He stood up. "And I remember what real courage looks like." Zach smirked. "You calling us cowards?" Frank looked him in the eye. "I'm saying respect isn't taken. It's earned." Tension rippled through the room, but Frank didn't step back. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. "Still cracked, still working." Zach laughed. "You calling your grandkids to come protect you?" Frank gave him a half smile. "No. I called someone who's walked through hell with me." And outside, just faintly, the low rumble of motorcycles began to fill the air. At first, it was distant, like thunder rolling over the hills. Then it grew louder, closer, unmistakable. The deep, powerful roar of motorcycle engines echoed through the quiet streets. People inside the cafe froze. Zach's smirk faded. Frank didn't move. Through the front window, one by one, the bikes appeared. Not 5, not 10. More. A dozen Harleys pulled into the parking lot, forming a half circle. The riders were older, grey hair, weathered faces, heavy jackets bearing patches that read Iron Eagles. War veterans, men shaped by battle, bonded by blood and promises kept. At the center rode a tall man with a white mustache and mirrored sunglasses. Ray Rodriguez. He swung off his bike like he'd done it yesterday, despite the stiffness in his knees. Zach took a step back. "What the hell is this?" Frank calmly stood and walked to the door. Ray met him halfway. "You good, Frank?" Frank nodded. "Just needed some backup." Ray looked past him at the bikers inside. "That them?" Frank didn't answer. He didn't have to. Ray turned to the Iron Eagles. "Let's make it clear." The other veterans moved forward, their silence more threatening than any words. Zach and his crew were trapped, outnumbered, outclassed, out of time. Tank tried to laugh it off. "We were just messing around, no harm done." One of the older vets stepped forward. "That what you think this is? A joke?" Zach raised his hands. "Hey, nobody wants trouble." Frank stepped between them. His voice was calm, but final. "Then leave, now, and think twice before mocking someone who's walked farther in boots than you've ridden on wheels." Zach looked around, realization setting in. This wasn't just an old man. This was a legacy, a brotherhood, a line you don't cross. With one last glance, Zach muttered, "Let's go," and turned away. One by one, the others followed. As the cafe doors swung shut behind them, a hush fell over the room. Frank looked to Ray, who clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Still got it," Ray said. Frank managed a smile. "No, we've still got it." The Iron Eagles didn't leave right away. They filed into Martha's place, behind Frank and Ray, their boots thudding softly against the tiled floor. Heads turned, conversations halted, and for a moment, time seemed to pause. Martha emerged from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron, her voice thick with emotion. "Coffee's on the house, gentlemen." Frank gave her a small nod, then took his seat by the window again. Only this time, the chair across from him didn't stay empty. Ray sat down, followed by 2 more veterans, each nodding quietly, recognizing something sacred in that moment. Ethan arrived minutes later, rushing in from his patrol car, face tight with worry. His eyes locked on his grandfather, then swept the room, taking in the sea of leather jackets and silver hair. "Grandpa," he breathed, What happened here?" Frank looked up, a softness in his eyes. "Just reminded a few boys that age doesn't erase strength." Ethan blinked, overwhelmed. "They hurt you?" "No," Frank said. "They tried, but they didn't know what they were up against." Ethan's gaze shifted to Ray and the others. "Who are these guys?" Frank's smile deepened. "Old friends. Brothers." Ray leaned back, stretching his legs. "We made a pact years ago. If one of us ever needed help, We'd come. No questions. Ethan looked around again, understanding now. And you all still carry that? Another vet pulled a coin from his pocket, identical to Frank's, and placed it on the table. One by one, more coins followed. Heavy, worn, engraved with their shared truth. No one left behind. The tension in the room softened. The regulars who had once stared now approached slowly, offering handshakes, pats on the back, quiet thanks. Even Martha couldn't hold back tears as she placed slices of apple pie in front of each veteran. "This cafe," she said softly, "has never been more honored." Frank didn't say much. He didn't need to. The presence of his brothers, the way Ethan looked at him with awe, it was enough. Outside, the town buzzed with murmurs of what had happened, but inside, something far deeper had taken place. A reclaiming, a reckoning. Frank had shown them all that courage doesn't retire, that dignity doesn't have an expiration date, and that sometimes the most powerful victories come without throwing a single punch. As laughter returned to the cafe, Frank leaned back in his chair, the sunlight warming his face. This time, peace had been earned again. Later that afternoon, the cafe had quieted, but the atmosphere remained thick with reverence. Conversations turned reflective. The veterans spoke in low voices, trading stories not of violence, but of brotherhood. Stories that had never made it into history books, but had etched themselves into their souls. Ethan sat beside Frank, listening more than speaking. For the first time, he wasn't seeing his grandfather through the lens of childhood stories or framed medals. He was seeing the man, complete with scars, strength, and quiet defiance. "You never told me about the pact," Ethan said softly. Frank nodded. "Some promises aren't made to be shared, just kept." Ethan looked at the coin still resting on the table. "Do you think people forget too easily?" Frank sighed, gazing out the window. "They don't forget. They just stop listening." That sentence hung in the air like incense, slow, solemn, and heavy with truth. The lesson was bigger than the fight, bigger than Frank. It was about legacy, about a generation that had been silenced by time, now finding its voice again. Not through anger, but through presence. Frank hadn't reclaimed respect through revenge. He'd reclaimed it by reminding everyone of something deeper. That character outlasts strength, that integrity doesn't age, that silence doesn't mean surrender, and that some men never stop standing, no matter how slow their steps become. In the weeks that followed, everything changed at Martha's place. A new respect settled into the bones of the town, quiet but unshakable. People who once passed Frank with polite nods now stopped to shake his hand. Teenagers asked questions, strangers offered seats. Frank didn't bask in it. He simply accepted it, the same way he had faced every storm, with humility. Ethan began visiting more often, not out of obligation but out of admiration. One evening, he brought his newborn daughter and placed her gently in Frank's arms. "She needs to know who you are," Ethan said. "Not just the medals. The man." Frank held the baby close, his weathered hands steady. "Then tell her this," he said quietly, "that we live in a world built by sacrifice, and it's our job to never forget whose shoulders we're standing on." The moment passed without fanfare, but something unspoken settled between them. A torch had been passed, not of war but of wisdom, of honor, of duty without noise. Ray and the Iron Eagles came back once a month, not to confront, but to gather, to remember, to laugh, to keep the promise alive. And each time they did, the town remembered too, that sometimes the quietest among us carry the loudest stories, and some heroes never stop being heroes. How many Frank Wallaces live among us, unseen, unheard, but carrying entire histories in their silence? In a world moving too fast to remember, maybe it's time we slow down and listen. Ask yourself, do you truly know the stories of your grandfather, your neighbor, the man who walks alone down the street every morning? Maybe they were never looking for applause. Maybe they just wanted someone to look them in the eyes and say, "I see you, I respect you." If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Drop a comment below. Tell us about a veteran, a grandparent, or a mentor who changed your life. Like this video if you believe respect should never have an expiration date. And subscribe for more real, powerful stories that remind us of what truly matters. Because sometimes all it takes is a conversation, a memory, or a single act of courage to bring a forgotten hero back into the light.